Good morning, good afternoon. History is made by those with the courage to act, the ability to turn insight into action. That attitude has been cultivated here at the University of Chicago. As a Booth alum, every day I recognize the lessons of the Chicago approach that were instilled in me to be curious, analytical, collaborative, and bold. This morning, I have the honor to introduce two alum that embody those characteristics and also embrace the school's motto, let knowledge grow from more to more, and so human life enriched. The alum are Senator Todd Young, Booth class of 2000, and David Axelrod, UChicago class of 1976. Our guest today, Senator Todd Young, is a bold leader who had the foresight to know that we, as a country, have the unique capacity to innovate through the most pressing challenges of our time. Together with Senator Chuck Schumer, Young passed a $120 billion piece of legislation called the Innovation and Competition Act of 2021. This act brings together academia, government, business, in a bold but confident vision that the United States will remain a global leader in innovation and technology. What I find most impressive about Senator Young is that he started and completed his MBA at Booth in slightly over a year while having a full-time job. And our host, David Axelrod, is a man that needs no introduction, the legend himself, David Axelrod. In 2013, Axelrod established a nonpartisan Institute of Politics here at the University of Chicago, where he serves as director to inspire and cultivate the next generation of leaders in public and private sectors. He has since hosted an impressive roster of guests and has recorded over 476 episodes in his podcast, The Axe Files. His storied career in politics has been the foundation to help raise awareness in politics, policy, and business. Axelrod has the unique capability to give us a glimpse into the nature of politics by leveraging his past relationships and personally connecting with each guest. I am honored to introduce both of these gentlemen. Please join me in welcoming Senator Todd Young and David Axelrod.
Andrew, thank you so much for the generous introduction. At least one of us deserved it. Senator, it's great to see you. Welcome back to the University of Chicago.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you. This is just one of the degrees that you've accumulated. I feel inadequate with my little BA degree because you're like an accumulator of such things. You graduated from the Naval Academy. You got this master's at Booth. You got a master's at the School of Advanced Study in London. And this is all while you were doing other things. You got a law degree as well at Indiana University. So what's the deal? You just couldn't stay away from school?
Mark Twain once said, I never let my education or never let my studies interfere with my education, right? No, I mean, listen, I've got a real intellectual curiosity consistent with, I think, the great tradition of our University of Chicago students who may be tuned in. And there are a lot of great things you can learn, and probably only learn through a really formal curriculum of study. And I recognize that. I didn't benefit from a real rigorous liberal education as a young kid. And so I think that, caused me to go out there and just get a habit of learning a lot of things. So I love to learn.
Your dad ran a small business in Indiana. And what was politics discussed in the House? I mean, what is it that spawned your interest in service? And obviously, you've served in many ways. You were an intelligence officer in the Marines, but tell me how that evolved.
So service was emphasized at the Young household: serving in your community, helping out people less fortunate, taking care of your employees if you happen to be a small business owner. And so forth. So we talked a fair amount about that. We didn't actually talk about politics much. I was sort of slow and coming to politics. And that was a gradual thing. I joined the military. The ethic of service was further cemented into my very being. And I learned a lot while I was at the Naval Academy, as so many do, about foreign policy, thinking about the global affairs and national security issues. As I got a bit older during my time in the Marines, I started to really pay attention to economic policy, because in the end, I feel like that tends to dictate so many of our personal actions and the actions of countries. So I felt like I was really weak when it came to economics. So that's what led me to work on a business degree. I didn't think I had the stamina for a PhD at the University of Chicago, and studied economics there. And then I got more interested in economic policy. And having had a brief opportunity, which you'll probably get into, to work for an esteemed U.S. senator,
Yes,
I became more interested in politics.
Senator Lugar,
That's right,
chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, and
so I was able to get a front row seat for a couple of years, seeing how the political process worked, at least on the official side. And frankly, I wasn't very involved in politics after that. I dabbled in the Mitch Daniels for governor campaign here in Indiana. But aside from that, I'd never been involved in electoral politics in any capacity until I ran my own campaign for Congress in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what prompted you to jump into that campaign? Were you recruited, or was that an idea that you?
I wasn't heavily recruited. In fact, this is more sort of a Marine metaphor, but I felt like I had to kick down a door to have anyone take notice of me and take me seriously as a candidate, which is understandable. I wasn't known in Republican circles very well. But you asked me what led me to get involved in politics. I looked around. I saw some talented people running for office. I don't think I've got a really big ego, but I have enough of an ego to think I can make a difference. And I thought I could make a difference. And frankly, I benefited from not knowing 1/10, 1/100th of what you know, David, about politics.
Well, I don't know about that.
And so, I entered the political fray sort of naively. I didn't have much of a net worth or a network, but what I didn't know in retrospect helped me make that decision to enter a congressional race and work hard. And I was very fortunate when I campaigned for office to have good timing. I was lucky, which is the most important quality that Napoleon said his generals had to have. They have to be lucky, and I was lucky.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk about a few of the issues that you're working on now, and then I want to come back to the politics. As we were talking before, I want to ask you how a serious person navigates a sometimes unserious and challenging environment in today's politics. But we're all focused on China right now for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the Olympics are being held there. First of all, do you think we should have participated? We've boycotted it at the leadership level. I know you've expressed concerns that this not become a showcase for China, given their human rights abuses. Should we have participated?
We should have. The right decision was made to send a message that we disapprove of the regime that's hosting these Olympics. And I think the diplomatic boycott sent that message. But I also thought it was very important that leaders like myself and members of the media remind viewers that this is not normal to have what you might call a slaveholder state hosting these Olympic Games. I've launched a social media campaign, hashtag Beijing behaving badly, to try and highlight this. But I have to say, this has not become a weeks-long infomercial. And I think the media, on balance, is done a decent job, and a number of legislators and others are underscoring that we can't normalize the behavior of this regime by allowing them to host these games.
I noticed they had a young woman, a Uyghur, I guess, carrying their standard in the opening, opening ceremonies. Um, and it reminded me when I was at a state dinner in China with President Obama, and there were a group of Uyghurs who performed, happy and singing and so on. And it was so stark because you knew, about the essentially concentration camps and the genocide and so on. So, but you're right that even that was noted probably in that context. But let's talk about China itself. I mean, we have this complex situation because China is obviously a competitor, could be an adversary. We have these human rights issues, which are profound. And yet it also is a huge economy. Our economies are integrated in many ways. So what's the right path forward in terms of the approach to China? And I know you've been deeply involved in developing policy even recently to confront some of these issues.
So this is an entirely different challenge than we experienced during the Cold War, right? It would be unrealistic and I think unwise to completely separate our economies. The incentives associated with market economies would kick in, and we would see many of our friends, partners, and others stealing market share if we decided to just pull out in short order from the Chinese market or prohibiting U.S. businesses from doing business there. So instead, we should identify certain goods, services, which need to be reshored to the United States for various mission critical reasons, and others where we should have a sufficient location in other countries, non-Chinese countries, so that we feel like we're sufficiently resilient against relying on the Chinese Communist Party for things like PPE, right? Beyond that, we're going to have to identify a way over a number of years to bring the Chinese Communist Party, to bring the government of China, whomever controls it, into a position of better behavior. And the only way I see that we can do that is by broadening and deepening our economic relationship with other large economy countries, especially in the Asia Pacific. This gets us into dicey political territory.
It does, doesn't it?
Especially for national Democrats, but also for many in the Republican Party, right? Trade is something that many people are uncomfortable with these days.
No, I know. You say it's uncomfortable for national Democrats, and that's certainly true. But President Obama, promoted a multilateral trade agreement, the TPP, that would have linked, I think, 11 countries, primarily in Asia, with us, and would have created an enormous kind of counterweight to China. President Trump ended that effort, and it hasn't restarted because of this resistance to trade. But isn't that what's needed to marshal the economic power in such a way as to create a counterweight to China in the region? Yes.
I mean, we need to make sure that our military efforts, our diplomatic efforts, no matter to what extent we can successfully pivot away towards the Indo-Pacific, that these efforts in the Indo-Pacific are built on a foundation of economic integration with our friends and allies in the Indo-Pacific. So that would be Japan and Australia and Vietnam and so many other countries. And so that means cooperation in developing next generation technologies. It means ensuring that we are engaged in all sorts of exchanges, academically, but most importantly, it means making sure that we enhance and deepen our trade relationships with these other countries.
And how do you Yes. How do you navigate this? I do believe that mistakes have been made because while these relationships are profitable for businesses and corporations, they've involved a lot of dislocation in some, and you represent a state where that's been felt. How do you assure people that they're part of the deal, that they're not going to be, we had trade adjustment kinds of programs that were never really very, never really very meaningful, at least seen as meaningful by people. We told people we were going to retrain them, and people who spent all their lives doing one thing are kind of saying, like, what do you mean? Retrain for what? So how do you get people comfortable with the idea that trade is something that can benefit not just Wall Street, but Main Street and workers who are affected?
Well, I think we need to make the national security argument, which has not been an important part of, I think, our public conversation about why trade is important, why trade matters. And we can make this argument, I think, quite cogently. If we're not forging stronger economic ties with Japan, for example, at some point they will very practically and energetically engage with the Chinese, and they're going to increasingly become dependent on the health and success of that Chinese market, maybe to the disadvantage of U.S. interests. So I think that's something we need to focus on. But you're pointing to what for many people are a lot more personal.
Yeah,
Experiences.
Which is how I think people
trade.
see things.
I agree. So we need to rethink, as Republicans and Democrats, although I think this would require a bit more of a rethink from fellow Republicans when it comes to trade, our investments in worker training and retraining. For those who have been adversely impacted by trade, they need some reassurance, sometimes significant reassurance, that this is going to be a priority investment for our country to ensure everyone is brought along as we engage with Asia Pacific countries. We need to make sure that those communities that are adversely impacted see a lifeline for their citizens. Now, we can't save every community that's seen jobs leave, but there are some smart investments we can make in our manufacturing capabilities, for example, so that we can make more things here in the United States. And so I've been part of those efforts. We need to make our supply chain more resilient, which I alluded to earlier.
Yes.
That too is something we're rethinking. So we need to work on a number of different fronts to reassure the American people. But most importantly, we can't superficially sort of raise the drawbridge and turn away from trade. That would be demonstrating, I think, a lack of leadership in this area.
You're out of step with factions of your own party. America First there were drawbridge elements to that message, the idea that we should turn inward. So there's political risk for you in espousing that position as well.
Well, there is. It's helpful to me that I can point to a concrete example very recently of this working in a bipartisan fashion. The Trump administration brought together labor and business, reassured a lot of our working class people across the industrial Midwest that we could have a better NAFTA. The USMCA agreement can provide a model of some higher environmental standards, higher labor standards that we might apply to other, whether it's bilateral or multilateral trade agreements. So that demonstrates what can be done when you bring multiple stakeholders to the table and work your way through the details.
The irony of this is that Canada and Mexico were included in the TPP, and the TPP, in fact, would have strengthened and updated the trade relationships between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico. And
there's a lot of irony in our politics.
You were very instrumental in the passage of this Endless Frontier Act, and you've been sort of referencing it, $250 billion to harden some of our supply chains, bring semiconductor production onshore, and also invest. And I think people around this university deeply interested in this science, technology, to compete with what China has been doing. You passed a version of it. The House just passed their own version of it. Are you confident that these things are going to be reconciled? I mean, will this become law sometime soon?
I have tempered confidence, right? I mean, I qualify.
That seems wise in this day and age.
Yeah, that's right. Look, this ought to happen. I mean, this is a national security imperative. This will help harness the talents and aspirations of communities and people across the heartland who feel underutilized, maybe unutilized during this dynamic, hyper-competitive globalized era, by seeding investments, public investments through our research universities and through our Department of Energy labs in next generation technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum computing. But the sorts of investments that you're not seeing from venture capitalists right now in the United States. This has fundamentally important national security implications. I mean, this is really about hardening and strengthening our national security innovation base, but it's also about creating the seeds for prosperity across the country. This is what happened. This is how the Silicon Valley was created originally, and Route 128 in Boston, the Research Triangle. This is perhaps not the catechism taught to a lot of free market acolytes these days, but we need to remember our economic history, that there is a really essential role for federal government to invest in these
as
areas.
A catalyst. I often talk about I think Lincoln was our greatest president, and for the reasons everybody commonly believes, but also because in the midst of the Civil War, he created I don't know whether it was the National Science Foundation, but our national science program. He laid the seeds for the Transcontinental Railroad, and he created land grant colleges, education, infrastructure, and science and technology. I mean, what incredible vision he had, and those things are still the pillars today of economic growth. And it takes he recognized that it took the federal government to do what individual businesses or states could not do for themselves, to catalyze these things. And that's still true today, isn't it? Yes, it is.
And I'm not uncomfortable saying that. I think that it's not uncommon for government to make unwise investments or to crowd out private investment. But there's some things, and you've pointed to a number of them, that will not receive private investment. If you want to build an intercontinental railroad, you're going to need some federal assistance, the granting of land and the permitting of that land and so forth. You're going to need the federal government to administer a homesteading program. You need federal investment in research and development of cutting edge technologies, and that benefits all of us. So these are things where unapologetically people like myself who really believe in the importance of functioning markets have to be comfortable advocating. Otherwise, I think we lose some credibility. We lose some credibility as stewards of the public good. I think it was, I cannot recall the senator who says, listen, if you're always despising government, you're going to get sort of despisable government, right? So that you need to recognize the proper role and scope of government, and this is proper and important, which is why I think this legislation, the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which passed out of the Senate with 70 votes during this tribalized time in our politics, has a very good chance of becoming law. If we can get the House version to more closely resemble the Senate version. The House version was passed on almost a party line vote.
Yeah, well, I mean, well, let's talk about the tribalization, because, you know, it used to not be so remarkable when you got strong bipartisan votes on things that really, on which there was broad agreement on national interests and so on. It's really hard to get a strong bipartisan vote on anything these days. And tell me what it's like. You're obviously a serious person, and I want to have this discussion and hopefully reserve a few minutes to talk about your efforts to reform the War Powers Act that you're working on with Senator Kaine, because I think it's important, and I think our students would be interested in that. But we can't not talk about the elephant in the room. That's not a partisan reference. You know, we are in a really difficult time. You just saw this controversy over the Republican National Committee saying, you know, that you know, what was the phrase they used about the January 6th election? Legitimate political discourse. You know, you were there. It was a riot. It wasn't discourse. You said it at the time. And I'm sure you would like to be talking as a public official and as a Republican about this, about you know, your idea about how we attack issues like housing and healthcare and other things, about the War Powers Act, about, you know, there are so many serious things to discuss, but we're focused on things like the legitimacy of the last election, which I think is certifiable, and the you know, and January 6th. How do you operate in an environment like that, and how hard does it make it to be a serious person in politics?
Well, it seems like the incentives are really off right now, David. I'm glad you asked me this, and if you want to, you know, stir up your base on the left or the right, probably the easiest way to do that is to spend a lot of time on some of these issues that are incredibly emotional for our respective bases, but things that deal with areas that we don't really legally have a lot of opportunity to make a difference. Let me give you perhaps a less dramatic example. Mr. Potato Head.
Yeah.
Okay. One can have all kinds of feelings about Mattel and whether or not they've, you know, made the right decision about having a gender neutral Mr. Potato Head and so forth. But what is a member of the United States Senate really going to be able to do about that?
Yeah.
Almost nothing. But you can get weeks and weeks of attention. You could probably fundraise a lot for your campaign if you talk about this, as opposed to making housing more affordable or coming up with better ways to use our tax dollars wisely and investing in education and so forth. And so
just as an example, let me just interrupt and say,
please.
You know, you got yourself in political hot water, at least with President Trump, apparently, for calling Marjorie Taylor Greene an embarrassment to the Republican Party. She's one of the biggest fundraisers in the House. And so that speaks exactly to what you're saying, which is if you light yourself on fire and everything around you, you get attention and you can raise money.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, I could spend all my time attacking Rashid Tlaib, Congresswoman who's known for saying some provocative things as well. But that takes me off of where I need to spend most of my political capital and political policy energies, which is actually improving the lives of people. One would hope if you play that long game, you're going to earn a measure of trust and support among the majority of your electorate. I think that's been the case, for me. People may want me to be more vocal about certain issues. They may want me to demonstrate more passion about some of the things that really light their fire, but I'm working on things that frankly transcend party affiliation. And I've earned some trust. And I think others can do that. We have just some incredibly talented senators and congressmen, Republican, Democrat, liberals, and conservatives. But so many of the issues we deal with, at least until you get into the nitty gritty, aren't particularly partisan, right? And so, it's frankly, it's been that simple. And then there's some issues, David, that I start working on that may be met with some skepticism. Is that a proper role for government or so forth? And, these are projects that you communicate on them once you've really settled on a policy that you're comfortable with. You don't start talking about these things at great length until you really figure out how what solutions you believe will make people's lives better. So you need a certain patience.
Yeah. I don't know whether it was a freshman hazing or whatever, but you ended up having to run the Republican campaign committee for the Senate last time. And so you were in charge of the committee when the two races happened in Georgia. And I mean, I would argue as a political person that President Trump's intrusion in that race and his focus on the last election was unhelpful to your candidates. You can opine on that or not, but isn't the continued focus on the last election unhelpful to candidates in November?
I think that political parties, if they want to be successful, if they want to grow their ranks to include independents, if they want to retain a lot of their loyal following, they need to be about the future as opposed to communicating about the past. So I completely agree with where you're headed on that question. And so our party needs to be focused intently on the future. And I would add, David, right now, focusing on the future is politically advantageous to Republicans at a time when you have significant consumer inflation, at a time when, a lot of Americans, Republicans, Democrats, Independents are concerned about border security, supply chain. Now's a great time to be focused on the future as opposed to the past.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's going to let you, but I think it's going to be a battle in that regard. And just let me say this, and I'm just interested in. I'm trying to get to the pressures that one feels. In this competition with China and in competition with the rest of the world, the infrastructure bill was really important. And you were involved, I know, in the process of developing this infrastructure bill. You spoke glowingly of it when the debate began. And then President Trump intruded and said, essentially that Republicans shouldn't be supporting it. And you didn't support it. And I'm wondering how much pressure you felt, political pressure. You're up for re-election this year. You probably did not want, given the fact that you are a reasonable person, you probably didn't want a primary with a Marjorie Taylor Greene type opponent. How much pressure did you have in making that decision?
Yeah, that would be an incredibly rational inference for someone to see the correlation of some outside criticism of that bill with my initial support and later my loss of support. But coinciding with that dynamic was Speaker Pelosi deciding to hold the legislation hijack until the social infrastructure bill, the Build Back Better legislation, would pass the House. So I didn't want to facilitate passage of that legislation. And so I withdrew my support. Now, with that said, I've been very careful and to ensure that Hoosiers understand. And I want everyone here watching to understand that I think there are a lot of really good provisions in that legislation, some of which I helped negotiate, like the broadband provisions. But I think in terms of your larger point, when there is outside pressure, especially pressure from popular Republicans and so forth on an issue like this, it of course impacts a lot of decisions. But in this case, I think most of my base certainly understands that Nancy Pelosi's intervention made this legislation less appealing.
It is, but at the end of the day, this discussion is about whether we have a perverse kind of incentives structure set up now where, one has to respond to the shrillest voices just to protect your flank. Not just you. I mean, I'm talking about many public officials, because ultimately you can't legislate if you're not there. And so,
as you mentioned, I like to have a seat at the table. So even if in the end, I'm not certain whether or not I'm going to support a given piece of legislation, it helps my constituents to have a seat at the table when I'm negotiating an infrastructure bill, election reform, a major national security initiative like this U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. And the fact that I am among those handful of senators that's consistently at the table, that's a real value proposition politically to my constituents.
Do you see, Justice Scalia got 96 votes and no opponents. Justice Ginsburg got 93. I think Breyer, who you'll be replacing, got 87. We don't see votes like that anymore. I mean, are you open to voting for a nominee of the president for the Supreme Court? Noting that you're up for re-election this year too.
David, I am open to supporting one, but let me speak a little to that larger issue and how it's changed over the years.
Yeah.
I actually am not certain that this is an adverse development. The fact that legislators are so attentive, not just to the temperament and the strong academic background of a judge, but also their method of interpretation as it relates to the Constitution in particular cases. I think that's a healthy conversation, a really serious one. And if a Democrat disagrees with one of President Trump's nominees, as so many did, on account of their method of interpretation, I think that's a principled stand. And so I'll be taking a principled stand. I don't want someone who takes great license, as I would view it, in construing the original intent of statutes or constitutional provisions.
I had the honor of sitting next to Justice Scalia when there was an opening, I think the first opening, and he said to me, well, I hope, he said, I know I'm not going to get a justice who agrees with me. He said, I just hope he sends us a really smart justice. And I said, well, I assure you, Justice Scalia, I'm sure he'll send you smart. And he leaned in and he said, let me put a finer point on it. I hope he sends us Elena Kagan. And it was interesting. And he said, she's really smart. I don't agree with her on a lot, but I respect her. And that was a really interesting
I've heard he was of that mind, and I suspect many of our justices are, regardless of their approach to their job, because if they disagree with their colleagues, they want to have crystal clear understanding of what their colleagues' position is. And it's our most talented justices, that regardless of your method of interpretation, that can make that clear, I think, to their colleagues in a given case.
So give us just 1 minute, and then we'll go to questions on the War Powers Act. And I know you haven't gotten a vote on your reform yet. So tell me what it would do, why you want to do it, and what the prospects are of actually passing it.
So this legislation would repeal the 1991 and 2002 authorizations for the use of military force against Saddam Hussein's government in Iraq. That's right, Saddam Hussein, the dictator of Iraq, was long dead. Those authorizations are still on the books, and they have been used from time to time to justify military intervention. I think that this is unnecessary when we have a constitution that leaves these war-making decisions up to members of Congress in the future. They can stand before their constituents and make an argument about why authorizing force, again, makes sense. And I also think it's dangerous to leave these on the books and without that sort of assent given, giving our presidents the ability to commit our men and women overseas in the future. So this would repeal those authorizations and restore the proper war-making authority of the legislative branch.
And you expect a vote?
I do. Leader Schumer promised Senator Kaine, who's worked on this longer than I have, commendably, that there would be a vote this year, and I expect that will happen. I don't know whether that will be in the next couple of months or just before year's end.
I'm going to, as I often do, break my word here and just ask you one last thing.
Sure.
How do you just say a word about the importance of engagement in the world? You talked about trade. We've dealt with these two variants of the pandemic, which is a global issue. The Delta and the Omicron, both of them emanated from countries where the vaccination rate is next to nothing. It just seems like one small example of why, when you invest in foreign aid and in assistance to other countries, that is not merely to enhance them; it's also to protect and enhance us.
That's right. I mean, we're increasingly globalized, not just economically, but in terms of public health vulnerabilities. We look at the issue of climate. We look at the challenges of supply chain disruptions, including our energy supply, national security. The challenges felt and experienced in any area of the world invariably will impact Americans. And so we have to be engaged. And the world still looks to the United States to play a leadership role, which ought to be natural for a country that came up with a brilliant model of divided sovereignty. We figured out how to delegate certain responsibilities, have some at the state level, some at the national level. Post-World War II, we figured out how to have some responsibilities elevated to a global level. We developed the UN and all manner of other global agencies. So we'll continue to do this only if our legislators and presidents are leaning in and indicating that the United States will stay engaged.
Yeah, that's very much in the spirit of Senator Lugar, your mentor, and one hopes that will be the direction we go. Here's a question I'm going to read from Emily McDuff, who's a Booth student. She said, "This is a question for you both, but I'm in the interest of time, I'm going to just direct it to you. And Emily, I'm happy to discuss my offline. What initiative or moment are you most proud of from your career, and what gives you hope politically today?"
Well, I mean, I think I'm probably proudest of this effort to really harden and strengthen our national security innovation base, this U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. We defied all of the skeptics and critics and frankly convinced a number of them along the way that it made a lot of sense to focus on outgrowing and outcompeting and out-innovating the Chinese Communist Party at a time when a lot of people thought that this cost too much money and wouldn't earn any bipartisan support. So it really took a lot of concerted work from my staff and myself to persuade people this was a good idea. And so at least so far, knock on wood, this has been my proudest and most exciting moment. But we're just getting started. This still has to go to a conference and so forth.
Now I want to introduce Rohil, who's a first-year student in the college who's going to ask his question himself.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for coming. So my question is, so we know the Build Back Better Act got stalled in December and it didn't have any Republican support. Do you think if it's like there have been talks that it could be broken up into smaller bills, do you think those smaller bills, some of them would have Republican support, like a climate bill or something like that?
Yes, I mean, this is one of the problems with the legislation. It was a very sizable piece of legislation. It didn't run through what you call regular order, through the committee process, where it has to earn bipartisan support and would receive bipartisan critiques and oversight and ideas. Had it done that, you'd ultimately earn some Republican supports. Now, you wouldn't get everything done, of course. So I have solutions relating to housing affordability and childcare and some other areas that this bill was focused on. And I hope that they dust off some of these ideas, try and run them through the committee, and that will give me an opportunity to put maybe my gloss on them and consider supporting these ideas. So I know there are other Republicans who feel the same way.
Thanks, Rohil. I wanted to ask you about this. The reconciliation, which is a kind of a workaround the filibuster, is the reason all these bills were in there is because it's a workaround the filibuster. You support the filibuster,
yes,
but President Trump, when he wanted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, that was done through reconciliation. Why was that acceptable and this not acceptable?
Well, listen, I don't have to support an effort that's done through reconciliation, right? So I didn't support it not only for process reasons, that is because my constituents through me as their elected representatives didn't get a say in this legislation. So the two are related, right? The process led to substance that I couldn't be supportive of. If instead the process were different, as I just told the sharp young student, and it went through committees, we would have arrived at some solutions related to housing affordability, childcare, and other areas that I could have been supportive of. So that's why I looked at the two differently.
Okay, we got a question from Sylvie, a Harris student.
Thank you for being here, Senator Young, and thank you for hosting Mr. Axelrod. Reshoring an energy-intensive industry like semiconductor manufacturing is going to put huge upward pressure on our energy supply chains, which are already under stress and have historically been the source of a price disadvantage when compared to China, which runs manufacturing off of cheap and inefficient coal. With the energy infrastructure package getting stalled through partisan battles and more market-based solutions not making a lot of noise, what do you see as the path forward for the energy infrastructure we need to support domestic manufacturing?
Great question, Sylvie, and I appreciate it. I subscribe to sort of the school of thought that I understand Bill Gates does, which is we need to heavily invest in applied research, which historically has a very high benefit to cost ratio at the federal level. If we invest in applied research, some of which could be used to fund breakthroughs in next generation energy technologies, that will allow us to discover new ways that are less polluting, that are highly efficient, but that can be used to run our economy. I don't think the best approach is to refrain from reshoring some of these chips, which I didn't understand you saying either, right? I mean, we need the chips to fuel anything that has an off-on switch and to ensure our automobiles work and so forth. But if we're going to make this transition, we still have a lot of work to do in innovation. Much of it, in fact, most of it done through the private sector, but there's an important role that government can play as well in terms of weight of investment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Graham, are you here? Maybe I'm supposed to read Graham's question.
if you have it.
I will read it. Hello, Senator
Thanks.
Young. Can you?
I am here. Sorry.
Oh, great. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, Graham.
Hi, my name is Graham. I'm a first-year student at the Harris School of Public Policy. So my question is twofold. Could you talk about the process of removing the repeal from the AUMF from the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act? And could you also talk about adding a sunset provision for any new War Powers Resolution or authorization of use of military force to the War Powers Resolution of 1973?
Oh, the sunset provision. Was that the 2001?
Bills basically amending the law to require a sunset provision for all authorization of use of military force.
Okay. So very quickly, the 2021 National Defense Authorization Act, as you correctly indicate, Graham, included a provision that would have repealed these AUMFs, as I laid out before. This is not without controversy. There are some of my colleagues that believe, though legally, it's pretty clear what this does, it could be misconstrued by some of our adversaries that were withdrawing from the world. That strikes me as an absurd argument. I've offered my counter arguments, but nonetheless, in order to make sure that we didn't lose some members of the U.S. Senate that would have otherwise voted for this important legislation, myself and Senator Kaine decided to remove the provision. We didn't want to sink the National Defense Bill by insisting on this important provision. Now, in exchange, this will be of interest in terms of process to everyone who's watching. In exchange for agreeing to remove this provision, which we worked really hard to get in there, we had to get the assurance, the public promise of Leader Schumer that he'd hold a vote this year. And he offered us his promise, and you know, the handshake still means a lot in this business, right? And so that's what happened. In terms of the 2001 authorization for use of military force, which is the primary legal instrument that has been used to fight our war on terror across multiple administrations up to now, right? The sunset provision is the most difficult piece. You probably know this from your studies. So there's a bit of a fudge or a finesse, if you will, that we've been working on, which is if we voted on this once, it failed by one vote in the Foreign Relations Committee. If the default position was yes, it'll be sunset, it's going to continue, and then if a member of Congress decides to they get a sufficient amount of support in the United States Senate, they can intervene. They can stop the 2001 AUMF from sunsetting if you get like a super majority vote. We've been working on the numbers of senators it would take to pull together and be able to sunset the AUMF. You can't just sunset the provision, though, as a matter of politics. It creates too much apprehension among our presidents, among senators, that you're going to be able to continue to carry on the war on terror, and I understand that, and perhaps most importantly, among our military leaders that we look to for guidance when it comes to these matters. I hope that was helpful, Graham. Yeah.
Graham, thank you. Senator, before you go, I'd be remiss. We're facing an ongoing standoff with Putin over Ukraine. Where do you think that you? Oh, my video is off. Hold on one second. Sorry. There we go. Where do you think this goes from here? How do you evaluate the steps that have been taken so far? And how do you evaluate the likelihood of Putin invading and the efficacy of the sanctions that are lined up in response?
Well, I think it's right and appropriate that we have demonstrated firm resolve and spend a lot of time and energy and resources trying to communicate to Vladimir Putin in particular that we're not going to allow him to reestablish a foothold at the doorstep of our NATO allies in Eastern Europe. If we didn't do this, it would not only invite further adventurism and revisionism from him, but also other potential adversaries like Xi Jinping, head of the Chinese Communist Party, who might decide to make a play for Taiwan in coming years. So I think it's important. In terms of evaluating what has happened so far, I think it's been appropriate to send heavy weaponry into Ukraine. The administration's done that, though I could, I could communicate disappointment that they haven't been able to diplomatically persuade the Germans and the French to really join us in a unified front. I think it's good that we've spent so much time diplomatically trying to bring together as many European countries as we can. I think the effect, and I think the troop presence has been appropriate in Poland. Mm-hmm. We have deterred Vladimir Putin for the time being. I can't tell you where I think this heads. You take it from day to day. I think we're going to have to assume that Putin will make a play to occupy the country, to overthrow the regime in some manner. And if that doesn't happen, I think it certainly will bolster the credibility of the United States in our national security activities moving forward.
If it does, and these sanctions go into place, some of them will hit the oil sector of Russia. Already, your constituents, I'm sure, as we sit in another office, some poor kid is getting calls about gas prices. They're likely to go up as a result of that. I mean, Americans are going to end up having to make some sacrifices here, aren't they? If these sanctions go into place, there'll be a reverberative impact. I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't, but we should be aware, should we not?
We absolutely should be aware. And as we approach that point when that could happen, we need to be encouraging our leaders. In my case, I need to be encouraging the administration to allow exploitation of oil and gas here in the United States, because otherwise, there will be oil and gas imported from the Middle East and Venezuela and other areas. So the United States was a swing producer in recent years, and it's important that we harness those resources as we invest in next generation green energy technologies.
Senator, you've been really generous with your time. You are a prized alum of the University of Chicago, and we hope that you will be a frequent visitor to us. And I should make a pitch for we'd love to place an intern in your office and have a close relationship with you in the years to come.
When the antelope has just gotten away from the herd, I'm going to take you up on that offer. So I'll communicate to any interested students that maybe they should reach out to our office. And thank you so much, David. I'm grateful to you and the Institute of Politics, and I'm a proud alum of the University of Chicago. So let me know how I might be helpful in the future.